So in this video, I want us to look at how we can remedy the problem where we have a query that is running for too long. Okay, so let's create a context. And so in essence, every request that is handled by our Go server, as a part of handling that request, it creates a context. In other words, it has an environment where it knows, for example, whether the user, the connection, is still valid, or whether the user, the client, has closed the connection. So it has an environment where it can provide details as to the client. Okay, so that's the important thing. So let's create a context. Okay. And so to create a context, I will simply say CTX, which is the command name that we use for a context. And we'll use cancel, which is another command name. And we will use the context package. Okay, so this needs to be imported. And we're going to use the with timeout function. So what this does, it allows me to check on the time that certain things are happening so that I can decide what to do, right? So it tells me, so canceling this context releases resources associated with it, all right? And as you can see, it returns two things, a context and a cancel function, which I can use to cancel the context and whatever resources are associated with the context. All right. Now we must provide a parent context, and we must provide the time that we are considering. So parent context, we will create a parent context by simply saying context.background. All right. So context.background simply returns a non-nil empty context. And this is how we tend to create a parent context. All right. Now the next thing we need to provide is a time. And so let's say we want something to happen after 3 seconds. We want to end the query after 3 seconds. And so I'm just going to say time.second. All right. So this is my context. So this is what I am concerned about. So CTX has that information that I will now use. Okay. Now, one thing we tend to do is we need to clean up, right, to prevent memory leaks. So let's assume that the query does execute within the 3 seconds. Then we want to make sure that before we leave our function, our get method, that we actually clean up the context. All right, great. So we defer cancel so that in the event everything works out, we need to make sure we clean up before we leave. Now, once I have the context created, all I'm going to do now is to change the query row. I'm not going to use query row anymore. I'm going to use the context version of query row, which is called query row context. Okay, so what is the context that I want to run this query in? Well, the context is I want this query to execute within 3 seconds. And so I have to now specify the context which contains that information. Right? So CTX has that information. And so now when Go executes this query, there are certain restrictions that it has to take into consideration. All right, and that's pretty much it that we need to change, right? So again, we create a context, we specify the time, and then we simply defer just to make sure we can clean up, and then we call the query row context. All right, and that's it. So I'm going to save this, and I'm going to start up my server. Well, let's just start it up. Go run. Okay. Great. Let's create a new one. And let's okay, let's call our so localhost 4000. Okay, so this one I'm not using any time yet. 34. Right. All right. So we get an internal server error. Right. And so it tells me that the server encountered a problem and could not process the request. Let's go over back to the to our server, and notice it tells me canceling statement due to the user request. Now, remember please note the user is not the client. The user is our application. So our application, right? So PQ, remember PQ is the PostgreSQL driver that allows us to talk to PostgreSQL from Go. So after the 3 seconds elapse, then we fired off a message or a signal, and then PQ, right, seeing that there was a timeout and something did not happen within the 3 seconds, it sent a message to our Postgres server telling the Postgres server stop the query. Okay, and that's it. Okay, so let's do this again, but we're going to time it. Okay, let's time it. And if you recall, we use a -w, and we're going to simply do something like \n, and we're going to have time, and we're going to use the variable which allows us to see time, which is time underscore total. Okay, in seconds. Okay, let's try again. Okay, so notice it took 3.009805 seconds. So it stopped processing after the 3 seconds. And that's the reason why we have 3 seconds instead of the 10. Right? Okay, so notice the error. It's canceling statement due to user request. So keep that in mind. Now, let's look at what would happen if we didn't have enough connections, enough open connections. All right, what kind of error would we get? So let's say that our, let's put this down. Oops, yeah. So let's say our query, right, gets executed. Where is it? Yeah, our query gets executed here. But what would happen if we don't have enough connections, database connections, to actually execute the query? Well, then it means that the query will be queued. It will be queued until there is an available connection. Okay, but by queuing the query, we will run out of time, because I didn't mention this earlier. When we create the context, okay, the time starts. Okay, so time starts when the context is created. Okay, so please remember that when I call this with timeout statement, when this statement here gets executed, line 96, we start timing. Okay, we start timing. So we don't really start timing when we actually execute the query. We start timing when we create the context. And so after we create a context and we hit line 100 and the query has to be queued, then time is still going. And so if no open connection is available to execute the queued query, then we will run out of time. Let's see if we can do that. So let me stop server and let me explicitly set the number of connections. So if you recall, db dot max open, and let's just set it to 1. Okay, so there's only one available connection. Alright, so db max open con. Okay, so I missed something. Okay, alright, CONN. Oops, CONNS. Okay. Okay, great. So I have one connection that I want. So let's see what that looks like. I will say curl, but let me bring this back up. Yeah, right here. I will say curl, and let me get rid of the time here. All right. So I'll say curl, and I want this to be run in the background. So I'm going to say ampersand, and I'm going to run this 3 times. So I'm just going to copy this, and let me paste this. Okay, so I want this to be run in the background as well. And one more time. I want this to be run in the background. So I want these 3 things to be run in the background. So I have 3 processes, 3 requests, but I only have 1 open connection. So let's press enter. All right, and let's see what happens. So I get the server encountered a problem and could not process the request. The server encountered a problem and could not process the request. All right. So one of them were completed, one of them, or 2 of them exited. What does that really mean? Okay, what does that really mean? So let's move over it here and see what happens. Right? And so I have canceling statement. Let's do this again. Okay, so let's run this again just for you to see. And let's just use 2. Alright, that makes it easier for us to see. So enter. Alright, I have 2. Alright, and then we have these error messages. Okay, so let's see what exactly is happening. So let's go back here, and it's telling me that it's canceling a statement due to the user request. So this one, as we know, means that one of them took longer than 3 seconds. Great. But then we have this one which says context deadline exceeded, which means that the time for the query to be executed elapsed. And that's because the first one, it just took too long. But the second one, because it was waiting, and why did it wait? Because there was only 1 connection available, so it was queued. And before it had time to unqueue, or to be removed from the queue and to be run, well, the 3 seconds elapsed. And when the 3 seconds elapsed, with without it being run, then we have a context deadline exceeded error. Okay, so you need to be able to differentiate these two. This one, the query was running, but it ran out of time. The second one, the query did not run because it was queued, and so while it was being queued, the time was still running, so of course it ran out of time. All right. Okay, so that's it. That's how we use a context. And again, let me reiterate, the importance of a context is it allows us to monitor the queries. And so we don't want, for example, if a user wants or requests a query to be run, and that query takes 10 seconds, but then a second later, the client closes the connection, then it's 9 seconds of wasted resources from the database. So the database is wasting 9 seconds computing a query that is no longer needed. And remember, in most cases, you are paying for that resource. So if you're doing cloud hosting, right? You're using computing power database resources from a cloud provider, they will charge you for all of this. And so you want to ensure that you're not wasting resources. All right, we'll leave it here. In the next unit, what we're going to do, we're going to update all our other methods to be able to handle a context. All right, I'll see you in those.